Okay, so I'm going to try and keep this brief. This is how to make a no-knead bread with only an initial quarter to a half a teaspoon of yeast. After that, it will take care of itself. You just keep making by taking scoops off the dough and adding it to the next batch. So I'm going to take through the whole process. The first one, it's a very simple recipe. 3 cups of flour. You don't need any particularly special flour, just not self-raising. I'm just using a plain flour. I often mix in other flours I'm trying to use up as well. So 3 cups of flour, roughly a teaspoon of salt, which can be pretty rough. Then you want that's about a quarter to half a teaspoon of dried yeast. If you use your finger to stir it in, I've read that the lactobacilli on your finger kind of help with the rising or the flavour. I'm going to use the same cup so I don't waste any of the flour, and it's a cup and a half of lukewarm water. So I'm mixing it just from my kettle, and it's a bit warm from my kettle and from my water jug. Sorry, I keep bumping the camera as well. That's 1. This is the easiest recipe. I'm rubbish at making bread, and this actually does do it. Right, then you take, I'll just use a flat bladed knife. Stir it in. It's going to make a slightly stickier, wetter dough than you might usually see. That's good. Just try and make sure it does all come up from the bottom. And that's it. Then you just want to cover it. You can use cling film or a damp cloth. I use a shower cap because it's really fast, and then just leave it somewhere to rise. You're going to leave it at least 6 hours. I usually leave mine overnight, but today I'll probably do it just until this afternoon. So that will be about 6 hours, about 6 to 8 hours. Okay, see you then. Okay, welcome to part 2 of the video. At this stage, the dough has risen it's just risen overnight, and as you can see, it's risen quite well. You can also see there's a little bit of a rim around the outside. That's because it's risen and fallen. That's okay, it will keep rising and falling and rising and falling. It doesn't matter. It's just how the dough behaves. So I've got myself a jar it's an old jar of honey. This is where you're going to see, I'm just going to take off about 1/3 of a jar. You don't want much more than that because it can sometimes get really, it will grow a lot. So this is instead of using the yeast from now on. So you've used your initial quarter to a half a teaspoon of yeast, and you shouldn't need it again. Let's get the oil in there. It's really sticky. As you can see, by the time it's all done, there's about 1/3 of a jar in there. Okay. Now what you need to feed it, which is about just a little dessert spoonful. Doesn't have to be, not really heaped or anything, just in that goes. about the same of water. So and then you stir that in, otherwise it will go really lumpy. You don't have to don't go overboard with this bit, it doesn't like to be stirred too much. It's just really just to work it all in. And then pop your lid on. Don't put it all the way on. You want to like turn it back a little bit. You want there to be a little bit of gap and a little bit of wobble, just to let a little bit of air in. As for the rest of the dough, I'm putting it into the bowl that I'm going to be cooking it in. That's pre-greased with flour sprinkled around it. And I'm going to leave this to rise for I'll probably leave it sort of a couple of hours. A good rule of thumb is 2 to 6 hours, just for it to rise again. You can, in a pinch, put it in. Sometimes it will rise quicker than that, so you can put it in the oven sooner. So we just cover it again, and again leave it. And when I've said before, just leave it on the side, I mean really leave it any old place. It doesn't have to be somewhere warm. I just put it on the kitchen counter and just leave it there, and that works fine. So yes, now that you've got your jar of yeast, that will continue to do its own thing. The next time we make a loaf, you'll put this in instead of the teaspoon of yeast. Everything else remains the same. So I'll show that after this has been cooked, and I'm going to do the next loaf. Then I'll make one last video just so you can see it all going in. Right, okay, thanks for joining me. Bye. Right, this is the final stage. As you can see, our dough has risen. I'm going to be putting that into the oven on I'll cook it on about 220. My oven's a bit dodgy, you can go hotter than that, for about 40 minutes. Then let it cool, chisel it out if it's stuck at all, and then just make sure that the bottoms, quite often end up sticking mine back in the oven the other way up just to crisp up the bottom, but that's only because my oven is dodgy. Right, so into this new bowl now, for the second time making the dough, I've put the usual 3 cups of flour, then as before around about a teaspoon of salt. Now for the yeast, instead of the tin of yeast, this is the yeast that we put in to the jar before. As you remember, it was up to about here, and as you can see, it's risen more or less to the top of that jar. So all we're going to do is scrape it out into this bowl. It's very gloopy, very sticky, so it will take you a while to get it all out. But do try and get most of it out. After all, we're trying not to waste things. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then, as before, you want the 1.5 cups of water. It's cloudy from the flour. Just check it with your finger. You don't want it too hot because the yeast can be quite delicate. So provided you stick with it being lukewarm, just about comfortable for your finger, you won't have any problems. So that's just under 1.5 cups. It can sometimes stand a little bit less than before because you've put the extra in already. Let's see how it goes. I've just reserved it just in case it's... I'm going to put the rest of the half in. There we go. And then once again, stir it all around. and then you can leave this again overnight, ready to work tomorrow morning. Now I've done this today hot on the heels of getting the first lot of dough into a bowl ready to bake. I often don't do that. I often in fact leave the jar for another night. All that happens is the flavour intensifies. It doesn't affect the ability of the dough to rise the next day at all, and that means I can just bake one day and make the next day and so on. You can also keep the jar in the fridge, and it retards the growth a little bit, and you can keep it in there quite comfortably for a week. It's never been in there longer than that for me. I guess it can probably stay in longer, but I don't want to sort of comment on that for sure, because I don't know for sure. So there we go. Once again, we're going to cover that, just leave that on the side to rise overnight. Right, so I hope this is helpful. I've done the video because I'm really crap at making bread. Whenever I think I said before, but whenever I need it, I don't know, it seems to go wrong. So this is a really foolproof recipe, but it also, really importantly, doesn't use much yeast. You only have to use that bit of yeast at the beginning, and for me, I find that really helpful anyway. But also at the moment when I'm actually filming this, there is a yeast shortage everywhere, so I'm hoping that this might come in handy for some people. I've disabled comments at the bottom just because I don't want to sort of get into all of that, because I have quite a severe anxiety disorder and I don't want to get caught up in any of that. But I hope that people find it helpful. If you do, then please give it a thumbs up. And I'm planning to make other videos at some point which are also to do with putting my years of not having much money at all to good use, and sharing some tips that I've learned on the way for making good stuff. Right, okay. Really glad you could join me here, and thank you.